Namaste. I would like to welcome you back to the Hindu Women's Festival, part of the Beyond the Bindi project. For the past few days, we have been exploring some of the most pertinent topics of womanhood and femininity from the perspective of the Hindu Dharmic Bharatiya lens. I've personally been fascinated by many of the topics that we've been able to bring to you on this platform. And we've been lucky enough to share insight around a range of topics, right the way from dharma and leadership, mountain goddesses and the primitive, redefining the primitive, through to uncovering the true meaning of Tantra, depictions of womanhood through the art and dance and empowerment through things like folk music, as well as attitude towards sex, Hindu women and caste, as well as motherhood. Many of you will have tuned into the first of my talks yesterday called Breaking the Cycle, It Bloody Matters, which I shared with you, where I shared with you my very personal journey of positive inquiry into Hindu and Dharmic menstrual health practices. At the start of my talk, I spoke candidly about how in my initial research, it was very difficult to find answers to many of the questions that women like me have had for many centuries, I'd say, around menstrual health practice. And it was very hard to find those answers in one place. I read a few books and articles, but nothing resonated per se. And obviously many of what I found was written by men, and I just felt that didn't sit right with me. And nothing really got me close enough to a true understanding of these cultural menstrual practices that we seem to deny very much from a Western perspective. And nothing really aligned with the Shastras. What did they say about menstruation and some of those Vedic systems and principles? However, concurrently, I've been following the work of a very special guest who we have with us here today. This is none other than Sinu Joseph. Sinu Joseph is the co-founder and managing trustee of Mitri Speaks Trust. She has done extensive field work in the areas of menstrual and reproductive health since 2009, actually, and she's traveled across rural India, interacting with women on the ground, with adolescent girls and others, to get a real first-hand experience of menstrual practices and their impact on women's health. Stepping aside from those popular Western narratives, which often cloud our judgment, she has stepped away from focusing on just menstrual products, and her work has really explored those native methods, cultural practices around menstruation, and really the science behind it. She has written extensively on unearthing the science behind native practices and bringing forth that unique Bharatiya perspective on menstruation through her blog. And most recently, she has written this book, which you see here, Ṛtu Viḍyā, Ancient Science Behind Menstrual Practices. And this is the culmination of her decade-long work on menstruation. And I've had the pleasure of reading this book, and I must say, I feel thoroughly equipped with many of the answers that I've been searching for a long time. So it gives me great pleasure in welcoming Sinuji to the Hindu Women's Festival platform. Namaste, Sinuji. Thank you for joining us.
Namaste, Shivani ji, and thank you so much for having me here. It's indeed my pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So I guess firstly, I really wanted to get under the skin of what the impetus was for you to explore this area of work, this field of work, because did it come about naturally, or did you stumble across it? Where has the interest stemmed from?
So I began my work as a menstrual educator, and I would go out primarily to government schools, and majority of my work has been in the villages. So when I would do sessions for children and I would start with explanations of biology, we always made our sessions very interactive. So every time we threw the floor open for questions, the questions came, but those were not questions about biology as I expected and I had prepared for. The questions were always about the cultural practices.
Yeah.
So children would ask, why can't we have curd when we have a period? Why can't we have papaya? Why are we told not to exercise too much? Why can't we go to the temple? These were the things that children wanted to know, and I was completely clueless about it. So the first 5 years of my work, I kind of ignored these things and tried to bring the focus back to, the uterus and the ovaries and all of that. But at some point, the more I traveled across India, I realized that across the country, there have been millions of women for years together, rather generations together, who have been doing these very practices. So the more I traveled and the more I interacted with rural women and girls, it really made me think hard about what I was dismissing as superstition, because it did not make sense that thousands of women for millions of years would hold on to these practices if it is nothing more than faith and tradition. And that's when I began digging deeper into what might be the reasons for this, what is the science, if there is any, and how did all of it happen. So that's how it really started. I learned from the very women who I thought I'm going to teach.
Yeah,
So,
it's interesting you say that, because for me as well, I was actually someone who, I said this in my last talk, I vehemently rejected some of these practices because, you know, when you're, especially when you're in the Western society, it's all notions of female empowerment and how women are being suppressed, and, you know, the whole movement towards women having a voice, which is very much needed. You know, I'm not going to disregard that. There are a certain group of women who don't have agency to voice who they are and be able to be who they want to be across a number of different sort of areas of work. But at the same time, on conversations with my grandmother and women of that generation, there must have been something in it, right? And I noticed that the menstrual health and reproductive health of that generation seemed to be so much better. They didn't seem to have the issues that we have today. I myself, as a PCO sufferer, I have experienced suboptimal fertility. You know, I'm very candid about that. And it led me to question, why is this the case? Why have I suffered for years? And what could I have known that was, you know, secret to our traditions that our foremothers were getting right? So that really resonates with me. I'm going to move into the bulk of what I wanted to ask you about. So in my last talk, I respectfully and humbly tried to articulate what I've learned so far in my research. And much of what makes sense to me has come, I guess, predominantly from both your bodies of work, including Ṛtu Viḍyā, and the second book here, the first that you wrote, the Women and Mala book, which really gives us a clear understanding of why women of menstruating age were not allowed to enter the Mala temple. I think through all my research, what is clear to me is that none of these practices were necessarily designed to denounce or suppress women, so to speak, or even to label menstruation as a shameful or dirty occurrence that makes women impure. That's very much the Western narrative, I feel. And actually, it's quite the opposite when you delve deeper. These practices actually celebrate the sacredness of the menstruation process, and ultimately are designed to really protect the menstrual health of the woman. And that was mind-blowing for me personally. And I thought, before we come into, you know, that age-old question which many women of my age and others ask around sort of temple restrictions, I think I'd firstly really like to expand on the topic of Ayurveda. In my talk, I spoke about the ancient Indian sciences, which I'd learned from you, and how they have a much deeper understanding of the body. I explained how the body is said to be comprised of the Panch Koshas, or the 5 sheaths, including that physical body, the Annamaya Kosha, and then the 4 other sheaths, which comprise the Sukshma Sharira, and the subtle body, which many from a Western perspective will know this as sort of quantum biology. And I guess according to our Shastras and Vedas, the ultimate goal is to shed these 5 sheaths to really realize the Atma and achieve that mukti that you talk about a lot in your book. And this can be obviously achieved through various practices of sadhana, etc. So things like yoga. And I think understanding and employing Ayurvedic practices is also paramount to understanding how the body can achieve this goal. That for every Hindu, it's important to achieve that mukti. And I think Ayurveda has a real fine understanding, right, of the Sukshma Sharira, and it recognizes those 3 internal forces in our body, the Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and how each individual has their own composition of these doshas. We call it a prakriti. And I explained that in my last talk, but I really wanted you to uncover that more for us. I wanted to really delve deeper into how an imbalance of the doshas manifests itself when it comes to menstrual health, because imbalance in doshas can manifest itself in a number of ways, not just according to menstrual health, but in many other ways. But when it comes to menstrual health, in your book, you speak about imbalances of either one of those doshas, right? So, and this is called, I think, pitta prakop, vata prakop, or kapha prakop. And I wanted to see from a Western understanding of science, how does that present itself through things like PCOS and endometriosis? Could you describe that in more detail, and the foods that help us as well in being able to practice an Ayurvedic way of eating to circumvent these things?
So that's a lot of questions rolled into a single question, Shivani ji. I will try to just zoom out for a little bit before I zoom back right in. So when we try to talk about the Hindu perspective on menstruation, there are often two broad views. One is the view that is based in the medical sciences, which for us is Ayurveda. And the other is the view that is based in religion and the tradition part of it, associated with spiritual processes. And that's wherein the rules around temple visits come into picture. Now, in our ancient Vedic system, we gave names for these two types of knowledge. The type of knowledge that helped you in day-to-day life and worldly existence, we called it Apara Vidya. And the type of knowledge that dealt with religion and spirituality, we called it Paravidya. Why we need to make this distinction is because oftentimes we use things wrongly without a proper understanding of the sciences and the Shastras. So even if you have to explain a practice that is completely about religion, you still need the knowledge, the Apara Vidya that Jyotisha Shastra and Ayurveda gives. And you cannot bypass that and suddenly start interpreting the Shastras based on religion. And that is why there are so many wrong interpretations. This needs to be very clearly understood, because oftentimes when I say how visiting a temple will affect women's menstrual health if they do it while menstruating, or visiting a mokshadam will anyway affect their overall reproductive health, the question that women ask is, so what if I don't want to, I'm not worried about having children and I just want to pursue moksha? Then is that fine? So that comes from a complete misunderstanding of what the sciences tell you. See, Kalidasa very beautifully said, Sharira Margam Khalu Dharma Sadhanam. Your Sharira is your Margam, your path to fulfill your Dharma. So if you're going to say that it doesn't matter, I will mess up my body and I will still want to pursue the highest spiritual reality, it's practically not possible, because your body is the path, the tool with which you can accomplish that. The human birth itself is considered as a very big deal in the Hindu Dharma, because it is only in the human form. It is only by being born in the form of a human that you can take your purpose of moksha to the next level. So never oversimplify this, that it doesn't matter what I do with my body, I will still pursue the spiritual path. That cannot really happen. Now that's a zoomed out version that I wanted to make sure everyone's very clear about, and we don't confuse the importance of getting our health right. When it comes to women, the core of our health and well-being is so closely associated with our menstrual cycles. The minute a woman's menstrual cycle is disturbed, it will manifest obviously in physical ways, but also in her mental state of mental health and her emotional stability. So this is a connect that we really need to understand. When we talk about doshas, it is not just about a physical manifestation of problems or of well-being, but also the mental and the emotional part. So as you rightly said, Ayurveda understands three doshas, or the three types of basic components that make up our Annamaya kosha and our physical being. And we refer to these as the Vata dosh, the Pitta dosh, and the Kapha dosh. Now, all of us have a particular combination of these, which gives us our unique Prakriti. Prakriti is our body constitution. When each of these doshas become imbalanced or aggravated, we call that aggravated state as prakopa. So that's when Prakriti becomes prakopa. So what modern science cannot tell us is why all of us, though we are women and we all menstruate, why is it that the characteristics and the qualities of our menstrual flow and menstrual experience is so different?
Yeah.
Right? So some of us may feel extremely angry just before our period. Somebody else might feel depressed. Somebody else might feel that anxious, nervous feeling about it. Why is it that for the color of the blood is different for different women? Why is it that some of us feel that, oh, we are bleeding too much, and some others feel, no, mine is very less? How do you make sense of these differences? And that is why with modern science, we can look at the effects, but we cannot understand the cause.
Yeah.
Because cause, if that has to be understood, that can only be understood by going to the understanding of the doshas itself. So just to give a few examples of what each of these doshas, when they are predominant in your prakriti, how your menstruation should manifest if you do not have problems, and how your menstruation will occur if you have a problem. So we will call that prakriti, as in without a problem, and prakopa, as in when there is an aggravation of a particular dosha. So let me give you a few examples. So let's start with vata dosha itself. Those of us who have a vata dominant prakriti, that means we may have more than one dosha, we may be a vata pitta or vata kapha prakriti, but vata is more dominant in us. If that is the sort of prakriti that we have, even if you don't have any menstrual problems, in general, the number of days of flow will be lesser. So it might be just 2 days for some, it could be between 2 and 3 days. The quantity of menstrual flow will also be less. The color of the blood, it will appear more dry because Vat has the guna of Vayu, of air. So the quality of dryness will manifest in the menstrual blood. So the color will be dark brownish, it will look without mucus, it will not be slimy, and the flow will generally be lesser. This is what it is for a normal woman who has a Vat Prakriti. Now, if a woman does certain activities or consumes food that aggravates Vat, for example, if you are traveling excessively just before your period or during your period, then the Vat will get severely aggravated. And then the period that follows will have the obvious qualities of a Vata period. That means the period will be very aggravated. It will be Shivani ji, did you lose me again?
Yeah, we got to, you were describing the qualities of Vata Prakop.
Okay.
Um, so
Is my voice all right or is it freezing in between? Are you able to hear me clearly?
we can hear you clearly. Yeah, definitely.
So, if you engage in activities just before the period or during the period that will tend to aggravate Vata, then the subsequent menstrual flow will have the characteristics of a Vata Prakopa. Just to give you an example. So, one of the times I got my period and did not know it, and I started eating ice cream, and I was thoroughly enjoying it. And though my natural Prakriti is more Pitta dominant, that particular month I had all the qualities of a Vata Prakopa. So my period color changed, the quantity was a lot lesser, all the Vata related characteristics started to manifest. Okay? So when women have an aggravated Vata dosh, then associated problems could include dysmenorrhea or period pain. Emotionally, you could feel very anxious, very restless, very nervous. So these are the kind of distinct emotional and physical disturbances that come accompanied with vata. Now, if we ignore this and if we don't know how to read these signs, and month after month we put our body to similar vata aggravating practices, for example, sportswomen. There's a whole subject on how women need to learn how to train in sync with their doshas. But very often they end up training excessively and training during their period, which is a strict no-no according to our traditional practices. But if they keep doing that and if they keep on aggravating vata like that, then the chances of amenorrhea, which is basically delayed periods for about 6 months, or oligomenorrhea, which is missing periods and periods becoming very unpredictable. You don't know when the next period will come. and accompanied with that chances of injury, because vata influences your skeletal system. So periods are the time when your bone density is much more fragile and your bones are more susceptible to injury and breaking easily. So that's why do not exercise when you have your periods. That's
Yeah,
where it
makes
comes from.
sense. Yeah.
Because when vata is in an aggravated, yes. See, menstruation is the process where very naturally in your body there will be a increase in vata and pitta, and that has to happen for the period to manifest. So you're already in a state where vata is high, and on top of that, you have aggravated it by over exercising. So you become very susceptible to injuries. So in my online course on Ṛtu Viḍyā and in my book, I have shared studies which show that scientists have found this connection between oligomenorrhea and injury. So the period is becoming irregular, and these particular athletes are becoming more prone to injury, and they could not figure out why. But they could see that this was manifesting. Through the lens of Ayurveda, it makes perfect sense because the same cause, vata aggravation, causes oligomenorrhea and puts your body highly injury prone, makes your body highly injury prone. So that's about vata. Then we
Amazing.
come to pitta. So my prakriti is also a pitta dominant prakriti, and pitta has the guna of agni, of fire. So it's
Fire.
a
Yeah.
yes, so
I
it's a
have the
very
same. I have the same Prakriti. Yes.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
So you will understand that just before the period we feel a lot of heat, a lot of body heat, and that's why a lot of women feel very hungry just before their period, and they feel like snacking more often, and
Yeah.
that's why I had the ice cream anyway. So so you tend to have more, you feel the craving for chocolates, for food that is more oily. But if you become aware of it, you will realize that that is exactly what you should not have. Because having food that is spicy, that is oily, will in fact further aggravate pitta, and from pitta prakriti you become a pitta prakopa state. So if you are a woman who's of a pitta dominant prakriti, your normal menstrual flow will be bright red in color. It will be a little more heavier than that of a vata person. And generally speaking, you will be able to have a relatively stable emotional state unless your pitta has been aggravated. If your pitta has been aggravated, again because of over exercising, since vata and pitta are very closely connected, so if there is a problem with vata, it will manifest in pitta as well. While over exercising could cause it, eating food that is excessively spicy or sour. So the entire restriction on not having curd during menstruation is because curd has a sour quality that tends to increase pitta. So having too much caffeine, alcohol, smoking, all of these can really cause a prakopa of pitta dosh. And when the pitta is in a state of aggravation, your period will manifest as excessive bleeding, more bleeding than usual. Emotionally, you will be very quick to get angry. You will feel exhausted. You will feel very tired and exhausted because you're bleeding more than usual. And this is because your pitta is in a state of aggravation. Lost me again,
We're
Shivani.
good. We're good. You were just on Pitta Prakop when you're feeling more angry, when you're feeling more exhausted. We can pick up from
Yes.
there.
Sure. So when pitta is aggravated, one of the sure short signs that women can pick out is this feeling of anger and short temper that they're not able to get a hold of. Without reason, they will find that they're becoming judgmental, they're having fights with others, and there's this uncontrollable heat and anger that you feel. And that's when you know that something you have done has not sat right and you're facing the consequences of an aggravated pitta. So food that is extremely cooling in nature. For example, here in India, we have a lot of tender coconut water or fruits like watermelon, all the melons. These help to really cool down the pitta. Or simply having boiled water with cumin, jeera, what we say. So add some jeera into water, boil it, let it come to room temperature and drink that. That's excellent for regulating pitta. So these are all simple things that traditionally the grandmothers would tell girls. And in fact, they would ask them, so is your period too heavy? And if the girl says yes, the immediate question was, did you have curd? Did you have gooseberry? So they will give
Yeah.
a list of sour things available in the village. See, and this is where the knowledge of Ayurveda is different from that modern science. A modern science will tell you that during menstruation, your body goes through oxidative stress. And there are a lot of studies showing that. So the way to counter oxidative stress is by consuming food that has antioxidant properties. So for women who have heavy menstrual bleeding, those who do not know Ayurveda, they will actually prescribe gooseberry, they will prescribe lemonade, they will prescribe oranges, because all of these are high in vitamin C, which has antioxidant properties. And
Amazing. Yeah.
where modern science will really mess it up, because you're aggravating the condition. So Ayurveda gives you the qualitative aspect of pitta. So all of these food may be high in antioxidant property, but if they are sour, they will further aggravate pitta and not regulate it. Okay? So that's why the knowledge of Ayurveda is so important, because I have heard and seen testimonials of sports women who presented a condition of heavy menstrual bleeding and would bleed for 15 days together. And their sports medics prescribed them oranges, they prescribed lemonades, exactly those things which they thought will help, but they made things worse, because it's not just about the quantitative knowledge of food that modern science has, but the qualitative knowledge of food that Ayurveda has.
It's very interesting because you speak of our foremothers, our grandmothers. My grandmother, I remember I said I present as predominantly Pitta as well, in terms of Prakriti. And I have also suffered from polycystic ovaries. And I wish I had known these things in more detail as I was growing up. And unfortunately, our grandmothers couldn't explain it from a scientific point of view, right? They knew it from experience, like you mentioned in your book quite a lot.
Yes.
And my grandmother
Yes.
used to always say to me, I would bleed for long periods because obviously there is an imbalance in my doshas, and this has then resulted in presenting as something like polycystic ovaries. And she used to tell me to drink takmaya, which you find in the faluda, because they have a cooling effect.
Yes.
So she used to
Yes. Yes.
prepare that for
The
me when I
chia
was
seeds, I think. Chia
exactly
seeds.
like chia
Yes.
seeds. And she used to say to me, drink this
Yeah.
every day, and your the number of days you bleed will reduce. And she was right. I never knew the answer why,
Yeah.
but it was a way in which to heal me or help me in that process. So I've had first-hand experience of it, and it all makes sense now.
Shivani ji, your voice was breaking. I'm not sure if the screen is freezing from my end or yours. Is it audible? Am I
It's all,
audible?
you are audible. Yes, you are. So is there one more dosha that you wanted to focus on, or shall we
Yes.
move? Yep.
Yes. I'll quickly cover kapha dosha as well. So those who have a normal kapha dominant prakriti, so kapha has the guna, the qualities of jal, that is water, and prithvi, which is earth. So earth and water have the qualities of heaviness. So a kapha dominant personality, a person with that, will naturally have a body which is slightly on the heavier side. So if they have a normal period, the blood will have those qualities of kapham, of phlegm. So you will see the blood's texture is more with mucus. That's sort of a slimy texture. The tendency of having clots is more in a kapha prakriti, and the color of the blood is a lot more lighter. So if vata dominant person had a dark brown color blood, and a pitta person a bright red, then the kapha dominant person's color of blood itself is lighter. And they have in a way the longest duration, or rather sorry, the moderate amount of flow of about 4 or 5 days. And kapha women, if they are healthy, they have the best fertility actually. So kapha really aids your immune system. It helps in cohesiveness, in binding, and help you boost your natural fertility as well. But if kapha dominant women, because they have a tendency to crave food, and they end up, they are mostly the foodies that we see. So they have that craving for food and often end up indulging more than they should. Consumption of excessively heavy food, consumption of food that is stale, all of this will tend to make the kapha go into a state of prakopa or aggravation. And consequently, the period that they have, especially emotionally, they will experience that state of dullness, of depression, of always wanting to just lie down and not get up. And we've seen this quality in some women, that they feel very lazy, very lethargic during menstruation. Uh, some of them may have the tendency of nausea or might actually vomit out. That is the collection, the accumulation of phlegm and of ama that their body is pushing out if they haven't been eating right and haven't been following the right diet practices. So this is how, with just this knowledge of doshas, of prakriti, and how prakopa can happen, we can start observing our period qualitatively. And if we pick up these signs early on, we can do so much to prevent it from manifesting as a disease later on, as you rightly said, Shivani.
Yeah, yeah, and that again, that resonates with me so much, because we can't really talk about menstrual health without thinking about our reproductive health as well, right? For those who are not on the path of mukti, who are here for the bhukti aspect of life, who want to play out, some of the the things like householder duties, etc., and be a mother. We really have to um, take care of the menstrual health to be able to achieve that high quality reproductive health as well, right? And for me, again,
yes, I would, but I would like to reinstate that it's not just for those who are following the path of bhukti.
of course not. Yeah,
The Sharira Margam Kalu Dharma Sadhanam. Even if spiritual path is your goal, you cannot do it with a suffering
without.
reproductive health. So
Yeah,
this is rule for all women. If you have a female form or a male form, and there are different ways for men, if you have a female form, you cannot bypass your menstrual and reproductive well-being
of
and think
course.
that you pursue a higher path of spirituality. It simply does not happen. This is the path. This is your vehicle. You have to go via this.
Yeah, you have to drive through it rather than try and circumvent it. Yeah, okay, that's
Shivani ji,
really
I think
enlightening.
I've lost you again.
Can you hear me? Is that
And
better?
I say this because often women, yes, it's better. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. And I repeat this because often we end up thinking that this is only for those who are following the pursuit of worldly existence. No, this is for all women. Women, as long as you are in your menstrual years, as long as your period occurs and should occur every month, it's very important that that aspect of your life is in good shape for you to pursue anything, whether it's bhukti or mukti. It's very important that your menstrual health should be good.
That's really enlightening, actually, because obviously I very much think about it from the lens of where I am in my life and what I've experienced in terms of reproductive health. But I think that point about it being something that all of us, whether we're on the path of mukti or bhukti, we need to take care of the menstrual health is again mind blowing for me. So thank you for that insight. I think we'll move into the second of my question, the second area, which I'm sure many of the women are really eager to hear about. And this is all to do with the restrictions in entering the temple whilst we are menstruating. Um, and, again, what I spoke about in my talk yesterday was how the restrictions in entering the temple during menstruation is quite a complex phenomenon, where there is a careful interplay between how our temples are designed and constructed according to the Agama Shastra, as well as having a real understanding of the chakra system, which operates at that Sukshma Sharir layer that we spoke about. And when it comes to Agama Shastra and chakra system, I was really interested in the parts of your book which spoke about Sabrimala specifically. And we think about the Sabrimala case, and we think about Lord Ayap, who is worshipped within the Sabrimal temple. But within your book, what was enlightening for me was that there are 6 Shasht temples, or temples which revere Lord Ayap, and those who are devotees of him must visit all 6 temples. And not all of them have restrictions around women of menstruating age, which shows that actually the arguments that some of the people were using against these outdated practices and women should be allowed in temples, it kind of gets thrown
Shivani
to
ji, your screen is frozen again and I am not able to hear you.
Okay, let's see. Can you hear me?
Shivani ji,
Namaste.
can you hear me? Your screen is frozen.
I can hear you. Would you like to leave and rejoin? Namaste. Okay, apologies to the audience. We are having some difficulties, but we will pick up where we left off. And I was just speaking to Sinuji about her experience with the Sabrimala temples, and the Sabrimala temples and the other temples that form part of the Shat Chakra temples, those that are dedicated to the worship of Lord Ayap. And I was just saying that I was actually really astounded by some of the information you gave, that those that follow Lord Ayap and revere him, to be able to visit Sabrimala, they have to actually visit the I think it's the 5 or 6 other temples, 5 other temples prior to visiting Sabrimala. And not all of those temples actually have restrictions for women of menstruating age, which kind of throws the case out of the water for those that were saying that the practices around the Sabrimala temple were so outdated. And you took it upon yourself to visit each of those temples, apart from Sabrimala, which obviously stops women of menstruating age from being able to enter, to be able to understand that journey. So it'd be really good for you to talk about that a little bit. I know Lord Ayap sort of operates at that Agna Chakra layer, and that also gives us some understanding. So maybe you want to do that bird's eye view again for us a little bit around Agama Shastra, and then delve into your visits a little bit.
Again, Shivani ji, this is also a very deep
vast
topic and very vast. And one thing I would like to say up front is that don't conclude based on this little discussion that we're having. If this is a subject that interests you, make it a point to either do your own research or read my book. And I'm only presenting a few bits, which is really the direction in which to seek. And it cannot be the entire answer itself, because that's really a lot of things need to be known as a foundation to understand this. Shivani, the problem with why this subject and this case has been so badly understood and misinterpreted is because the sciences based on which these matters came into being are no longer discussed, taught, or understood. Like you rightly mentioned, we have an entire Shastra, the Agama Shastra text, which talk about what is a Hindu temple, how is it to be constructed, what is the meaning of the Prana Pratishtha process, which is what sets a Hindu temple aside from a church or a Gurudwara or any other religious prayer hall. A Hindu temple is a space where every corner, every inch, every object has gone through this process of Prana Pratishtha, which means prana, the basic life force, has been infused into it through a scientific technique for which the particular archakas have gone through years of training. So you can't just become a pandit. There is a training even for that. And anyone who's not a pandit cannot even go beyond a certain point in most of the temples, because their health and their life itself could be endangered, because that's how powerful these places are. And it is with all these understandings that the rules came into place. Now, the Agama Shastra texts itself are divided into 4 quarters or 4 padas, as we call it. So, 2 of those quarters, that is one half of the Agama Shastra books, were about the philosophical understanding, and the other half was about the rules and restrictions. For whatever reason, today we only have the rules and restrictions. So pertaining to Sabrimala, we have the Tantra Samuchaya text, which will tell you women of this age are not supposed to enter. But that is not the text which will explain why. The texts that explain why are different, and we have either lost it or no one's referring or studying it anymore. And that's why there is such a huge gap in our understanding. We are seeing the rules, but we are not seeing the explanations behind these rules. So, and these explanations are not greatly different from the other understanding of Moksha Shastra. If you pick any one of the Moksha Shastra texts and understand it deeply and contemplate on it and know it through experience, then you will be able to understand a lot of it. But without ever delving into it, when we try to look at these practices, it's not surprising that they come across as means to suppress women and so on and so forth. Before I jump into the reasons of why there are these restrictions in Sabrimala, let me straightaway give you some testimonials and stories that I have heard after I published the book, and when women and people associated with the Ayappa tradition started talking to me about it. See, I had a chance to present this book to the then Tantri of Sabrimala, who's the chief priest. And in a particular event organized in a mini Ayyappa temple in Mumbai, I met a lot of devotees whose families have been associated with the Puranic legend of Ayyappa, of Manikantan itself. So I got to verify what I had presented in my book with these people, and they all agreed that that was the real reason, which is that if women of reproductive age enter the Sabrimala shrine, even though they don't have their period at the time of entering, then their reproductive health will undergo irreparable changes. This could manifest as PCOD, it could manifest as endometriosis, it could even manifest as hyperandrogenism, that is extreme masculine features. And if you go back and look at some of the women who fought and battled it out and actually entered Sabrimala, these were activists. If you look at them, if you look at their mannerisms, if you look at their voice, you will understand that what I'm saying about hyperandrogenism is actually very evident in them. And because I'm sure this is not the first temple that they have broken the rule and gone. Their entire fight was about that, and it is very in obvious ways to me, manifesting in their personality, how their period has been impacted by it. After I wrote the book and when I discussed about this, there were people who told me that yes, within their families, there were women who had just reached menopause and thought that no, now they're ready, and they ran off to the yatra. And even before they got to Shabrimala, just as part of the yatra and the entire vratam that they followed, the period came back in a nasty way. So traditionally, you have to wait 7 years before menopause before you make the journey. So this also is something that not many people know. That's one thing that I heard happened. Recently, another woman wrote to me about how, as a young girl, before she got her period, which is traditionally considered as all right, but before she got her period, she had been to Shabrimala 3 times. And the third time that she had been there, she saw the Makara Jyoti, and she experienced an intense, I will not describe it, but let's just say that she had a very intense experience while she was there at the age of around 9. And then later, when she got her first period at the age of 12 or 13, it was very, very problematic. For years together, her bleeding was not predictable, either too heavy or she had medicines and then it stopped. But then she started developing masculine qualities, excessive facial hair. From being a very slim young girl, she went on to have physical characteristics that were more manly in nature. And it was very kind of her to share this with me. And she has given me the permission to say this publicly so that others can start digging deeper into this, because it is possible that a place that is a mokshadam will directly impact a woman's physiology. So, right now I'm questioning the thing that is it even okay to send very young girls there? Maybe not all of them will have an intense experience as this particular woman had. But even if there is a slightest chance that that can happen, it's not a good idea to be taking girls to Shabrimala. And then I started asking about how old is this tradition of allowing girls prior to menarche. And some people said that actually it is a newer edition of maybe 50, 60 years. And originally, women of all ages were not allowed to enter Shabrimala. And to me, that makes sense because we have very similar traditions in Japan. We have very similar traditions in Greece, where there is a mountain and a monastery where even female animals are not allowed to enter. Okay, so it's not just humans in the female form. Anything that is female, such places can really create havoc with their reproductive health. So this is the what of it. What can happen if you go to Shabrimala? Okay, so we have to be very, very careful before we post these questions of, oh, I want to pursue moksha and I can go there and it's okay if my period is messed up. It's not just that your period will stop, it's that you will have extremely painful conditions that you have to deal with. It will affect your emotional and mental health as well. So please do not take this lightly when there is a tradition and a rule that is there around women's entry to a particular temple. This is
Yes.
something that, yes, Shivani,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I feel it really helps us understand that this is not about us being dirty or impure, which is often what this argument is downgraded to, right? That it's because we are the dirty ones,
That's
or
absolute nonsense,
it's
and
nonsense.
that's because of complete lack of understanding of the Shastras and the indigenous sciences.
Of
You
course.
end up interpreting things based on the current worldview, and that's when you add these terms like impurity, which is really not at all an Indian concept of menstruation, and I will come to that later. So visiting a mokshadam, and it's not just Shabrimala. Women who've been to Kailash, women who've been to Kashi, women who've been to Badrinath, all these places that are mokshadams, traditionally, women only went there much after menopause. Okay, and when they were done with their worldly responsibilities, and then their bodies could go through that sadhana with ease. Before that time, if you go there emotionally, you will experience a sense of vairagya, a lack of interest in worldly pursuit, and physically it will actually alter your reproductive health. And that's the reason why we are told not to go to these places. It's difficult in the given time that we have in this discussion to engage into the why of it, because as you said, we need a background in Agama Shastra, we need to know chakras and how chakras impact your endocrine glands. And even within this modern science, you need to understand what we call the HPO axis, your hypothalamus pituitary ovarian axis. So menstruation is not a phenomena of the ovaries alone. It starts from the hypothalamus in your brain. So that's where the first hormones are released. And when you go to a place that is a mokshadam, you are only working to trigger the Agnya chakra, and only the hypothalamus is working to release hormones. But your ovaries are not equally energized, and your ovaries are not able to keep up with the excess push of hormones that is coming in. And that's where the problems start to happen. I mean, this is just a really a very zoomed out view of it.
Yeah.
A lot of micro details that I've explained in my book, which those who are interested can read. But I feel that even if you don't understand it, please take the experience of our ancestors and our women and understand that these rules are there to protect your health. Absolutely nothing to do with the notion of impurity, which in itself is a false narrative.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense, and I agree. It's such a vast area of work to understand. And yesterday I tried to touch on the tip of the iceberg, helping people who were listening into yesterday's talk about the chakra system and the vayus that operate in our body at all of those levels of chakras. And so hopefully that's given a little bit of an introductory explanation to those viewers who have joined us again today for today's talk. But equally, this book has everything in there, and I really highly recommend everyone delves a little bit deeper if they want to find out more. But moving on, just again touching on, and I think this is an extension of what we've been speaking about in terms of chakra system and Agama Shastra. I was looking at the worship of the Devi, and obviously Devi is a huge part of our dharma, and we worship Shakti in all her forms, the feminine energy. And you know what I found really interesting as well was that we are also told that we should not enter a Devi temple when we're menstruating, regardless of the fact that she's the female form or not. And you know, what I found interesting was, even as a woman who's in that menstrual sort of stage, you know, you're having your period, if you go into a Devi temple, obviously the Swadhisthana chakra is the area that is being energized within our body. And whilst that is in line with obviously the chakras that are operating within a Devi temple, this is still counterproductive because it might upset your flow again. You might end up having a heavier flow because there's over energization of that chakral area. So that was quite interesting for me, and I was wondering whether you had any take on why we're not allowed to do garbas. And I'm thinking it's similar reasons, but a huge question here in the West, as there's a huge Gujarati community here, is why are we not allowed to go to garbas during our period, right? And they, you know, the woman, we often see the argument that said that you know, she's Devi, she also bleeds, and we've seen instances of the bleeding goddess temples in India, Kamakhya, etc., which maybe you'll touch on for us.
Sure. So this is a very important question, and that's why, though the answer is a little lengthy, I will make the effort to explain it because women should know this. See, first and foremost thing about Vedas and Shastras, they are not contradictory. Okay, so if we say that Shakti is pure and Shakti manifests in all women and menstruation is pure, then how do we understand that women are not allowed to go to the temple? We cannot have contradictory answers. If the answers are seeming contradictory, it means we haven't understood things in depth. This is the first and foremost thing you have to understand. So if you remember right at the beginning of our conversation, I said we have Apara Vidya and Paravidya. And without understanding Apara Vidya, which is about Ayurveda and a physical form, if we suddenly only look at Paravidya and say, oh, Devi is in all of us and it's fine, that's when we lose the plot, because we haven't understood our sciences well. Okay, so this is where I will delve a little deeper into what we call the Pancha Pranas. So prana is the basic life force, and it has 5 subtypes which operate in different parts of the body. So the prana which operates in the upper region, which helps you inhale the oxygen and the air, we call that subtype as pranavayu. So prana is also the life force. And when we say pranavayu, it refers to one of the subtypes of the life force prana. So inhalation, or when you take food, the swallowing of food, that happens because of this movement of this force prana, which moves in like this. Then exhalation, or uh, things coming out of your mouth and via the throat, like sound or speech, that is the function of something else called the Udana Vayu, which goes like this. From here, it goes outwards as Udana Vayu. So if you notice, our elders will tell us, do not talk while eating. Because when you eat, the process of pushing food down, of swallowing, is a function of pranavayu going downwards like this. And when you talk, it's a function of udana going in the opposite direction like this. So if these two opposite forces are triggered at the same time, you will choke. And that's why the elders tell you don't talk while eating. Okay, so that's one. And then we have the Vyana Vayu, which basically carries the life force prana across all over our body to all our limbs and to our toe and to all the end points of our body. That's Vyana. And then you have the fourth, which is Samana Vayu, which operates in the region of the abdomen. Now, Samana Vayu is typically shown as a circular moving force. When you consume food, for the process of digestion to start, Samana Vayu needs to become active and start moving. So if you pay attention, when your stomach is full, at least in India, when someone eats a lot of food, what do? We go rubbing our stomach and say, I'm full. So that rubbing movement, we don't rub like this, we don't rub like this. It's circular, because unconsciously we are moving our hands in the way in which Samana Vayu should move to start the process of digestion. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Observing these things experientially also, you will understand the Vayus better. So there is Samana Vayu. And the fifth most important Vayu for us to understand this whole phenomenon of why we shouldn't go to temple is when we understand the Apana Vayu. Apana Vayu always moves in a downward way. It operates in your reproductive and excretory region. It is similar to your body's gravitational force. So normally, if you throw anything up in the air, it does not stay up, it comes down, because there's gravity whose direction is always downwards, and it needs to remain like that. Similarly, within our body, Apana Vayu performs this action of gravity. So the removal of waste from the body. Some background noise, I'll just it. I think that's someone's diesel generator, because there's a power cut in the area. Am I audible, Shivani ji, if I continue?
Yes,
It's
you're
okay?
audible. Yeah.
So all movements that have to be downward and outward, the removal of excretory matter, the flow of the menstrual blood, the downward movement of semen in men, and also the normal delivery of a child. All of this is governed by the downward moving Apana Vayu. So if there's any disturbance in that downward direction, if there's any disturbance in the direction of Apana, and it is not able to flow as it should, then it will manifest as problems in all of these functions. Shivani, I think I will just try to go inside. Isn't the noise too much?
I can hear you. If I can actually hear you.
Is it okay? Can I continue?
You can
Maybe.
continue. You can continue. I can hear you.
All right. Fine. So coming back to temples, it's not just that women who are menstruating should not enter. There is a simple rule for everyone that you should go on an empty stomach, isn't it? You're supposed to take bath, you're supposed to clear your bowels in the morning, take a bath, do not have food, first go to the temple, and after that only should you have food. Why is that rule there? Because if you eat food, your samana will start to become active. If in the process of digestion, apana will start to remove the waste products. That's why the bowels need to be empty before you go. And why does this matter in the temple? Because every temple acts on all these pancha pranas and starts to work on them in different ways. So if you go to a temple that works on the higher pranas via the higher chakras, these are typically mokshadhams, then they will start to turn the apana and samana towards the pranavayu, that the direction will start to reverse. On the other hand, if you visit temples that are to do with the lower regions of the body, because the lower chakras and most of the Devi temples associated with fertility work with the lower chakras, because samana and apana are extremely crucial for worldly life and reproductive health. So at a time when apana is already active during menstruation, if you go to such a place, there will be an over trigger of it and you will bleed excessively. Even if you're not bleeding, but you've gone with a stomach full and samana is working, and you go to a temple that further works on it, you will have a stomach upset. So many people don't realize it, but they have a stomach full of breakfast and then go to a temple and then they will have loose motions or they will end up vomiting. So that's how we need to understand these things. We have to understand the values, the sciences, and then it will make sense, and you will no longer view it as something to do with restriction, and we will no longer attach ideas from spirituality that we don't understand. This doesn't make you any less a Shakti. It is just that at that time, your body is continuously active in the Apana Vayu. And anything, any space that can cause a further trigger of it, simple things, a yoga practice like Vajrasana. Okay, Vajrasana is a process when you sit with your legs under you. This is a position taken by Muslim women during namaz. And that's why they are restricted from doing namaz during menstruation. Because the position of namaz is Vajrasana as we understand it in yoga. And Vajrasana triggers the apana and apana. Yes, and that will cause you to bleed excessively. This is the way in which we have to understand it and not confuse the Apara Vidya and the Paravidya, and definitely not go into Paravidya without establishing yourself thoroughly in Apara Vidya, which is the knowledge of Ayurveda is one of those things.
Amazing. Actually, that I think that kind of answers the question around garbas as well, and being in the presence of Devi, right? Of the same thing. Do we see that when the Devi is in the middle and we're dancing around the Devi, she's also seen as someone who is there's pran there, right? And so it's the same.
So I'm sorry, good that you brought me back to it. So with Garba, there are two things. One is that it's an excessive physical movement, excessive physical exercise, is it not? So even if you negate the whole aspect of Devi, because if Devi is just there as a symbol and it is not a prana pratishtha, it will not have the same effect on you. Okay, and that's why a Gurudwara or a church, it's just a building, there's no prana pratishtha there, and that's why there are no rules. But if the Vigraham of Devi is one which has a prana pratishtha done, definitely it will affect you. But even keeping that aside, just that excessive physical workout that a Garba does can get you into problems, because it will aggravate your Pitta and your Vata.
Yeah, and to that end, Sinuji, obviously that's talking about actually entering a temple. But if we are also trying to energize a lot of those higher chakras within our body through things like meditation, etc., should we be doing those things even if we're not in a temple? Should we be doing those things when we're on our periods?
This is such an important question, Shivani ji, because every time I talk about chakras, and now I'm very careful, everyone writes to me, I want to trigger so and so chakra, and how do I do it? I've even got phone calls from people saying, I have COVID, can you tell me which chakra will help me prevent it? So that's not how it works. The whole science of chakras is not a child's play. It must never be attempted by one without a proper guru guiding you step by step through it. You must not go there at all. And for women in the reproductive age, especially, working on your higher chakras could mean that your apana could change its direction. From going downwards, it could reverse if your practice is intense. And when the apana reverses like that, your blood flow will reverse. And that's what endometriosis is. In the condition called endometriosis, there is a reversal of the blood flow with deposits of the endometrial tissue seen as far high up as in the heart and the lungs. People in modern science does not understand how can the endometrial tissue, which is your lining of the uterus, go up so far? How can it change direction? But that's a condition that can happen if the apana itself inverses. So excessive triggering of the higher chakras for women in the reproductive age is not recommended. It's not recommended. Definitely not during the period. People ask me about dhyana. I can do dhyana during the period. The thing is that most of the time we do it wrong. So that in that sense, it doesn't matter. But if done right, dhyana will bring your focus to your agnya. And when your mind is there, when your focus is there, all your pancha pranas will also turn towards that. So apana will also change its direction and move upwards if dhyana is done correctly. And that's why even dhyana is not recommended during menstruation. You can do dhyana at other times, but not excessively. And even working on chakras, especially going to temples or practices that trigger only the higher chakras, I do not recommend that for women in reproductive age, because if that becomes an intensive practice, it will manifest as problems in your reproductive health.
Okay. Really interesting. I'm going to move into some of the other questions. I know we've probably got not too much time, but there's three questions that I really wanted us to be able to touch on if we can. And firstly, I just wanted to outline the story of Lord Indra for everybody, because, you know, on my research, not just in your book, but across many things that I've read, the reasons for why women got periods in the first place is described in the Srimad Bhagavata Purana, right? One of the stories. And obviously the Purana stories, they're just a way of embodying a teaching that was laid out in the Shrutis, right? In the Vedas. So, but the stories help us understand. And obviously for Lord Indra, the ruler of the Devas, he was very angry one day and he committed Brahma Hatya, right? So he killed, he slayed the three heads of Vishwarup, who was the main Pandit for the Devas. Now, Vishwarup was also part Ashura, a demon, and all of the sacrifices that he took from the ceremonies that he conducted, he gave part of those sacrifices to the Ashuras. And Lord Indra was highly angered by this. And so from his anger, he cut off the three heads of Vishwarup. Now, obviously, Vishwarup being a learned man and a Brahmin, this is the highest sin that can be committed by someone to kill a Brahmin. And Lord Indra, obviously, he took a lot of penance. He took a year of penance to get rid of his sin. But even after that, he felt like he needed to pass his sin on and really cleanse himself. And so he approached four entities: the water, the earth, the trees, and women, all natural, nature-driven entities, by the way. And all of these entities agreed to take on a quarter of his sin each. And in return, they were granted certain boons. But the actual sin manifested in different ways across each of those four entities. So in trees, we see sap. On the water, we might see foam or bubbles forming on the surface of water. On the earth, we might see areas of barren land. And in women, it manifested as what was known as the stained garment. So the period, so to speak, the menstruation. Now, whilst that's a wonderful story, I feel like there's still notions of sin and guilt that are associated with this story, which I really take a gripe with. You know, my vehement rejection element of me still comes out. And I wanted you to debunk that for us, because I think there's a beautiful way in which you describe it in your book, and there's an alignment with celibacy in men and sort of that mukti path that you also you you kind of align it to, and it'd be really great to hear you explain that to our audience.
Yeah, Shivani ji, before I explain that, I would like you to also tell, so the audience understand what are the common interpretations of it before I tell you mine, so that they will be familiar with how this is commonly interpreted, this whole story.
Yeah, please do. Please do.
No, I would like you to tell that how the
Oh,
common interpretations of this, what is it that we generally read?
yeah, we generally read that, we took on the sin of man, of the male, and it's almost seen as this, I don't know, for me, the way I've interpreted it is we've taken on a quarter of the guilt of man, and therefore now we are the dirty ones, we are the impure ones. And, when you see the period, it's a sinful thing. It's seen as, it's the guilt of something that a man did, and for me, it's wrong. It doesn't feel right. And it sits completely misaligned to everything else you've just described to us about the sacredness of menstruation. And also at odds with the element in your book where you describe about the celebration of men up in women, in lots of parts of India, which I've touched on in my previous talk yesterday.
Yeah, thanks for that, because you've just pointed out intuitively how women can know things much more than some male scholars who probably only go by the text and have never experienced menstruation. So those interpretations of how women took on the sin or the guilt of Indradev, and that's why period manifests. Those interpretations which say that, in fact, because Indradev committed Brahma Hatya of killing a learned man, a Brahmana, then menstruation is equivalent of Bruna Hatya, which is killing a life that is waiting to take birth. So my question to such scholars, the thought in my mind has always been, so does that mean that with every period women should try to conceive, because otherwise you're killing a life which is to be born? I mean, is that what you're trying to say? It just does not make sense, the kind of nonsensical interpretations that have been out there. And then there are interpretations which say that women are very lusty in nature, because that particular line from the text uses the word kama. Now, minute you hear kama, everyone thinks of Kama Sutra, but in Sanskritam, kama simply means worldly desire. Worldly desire, that is bhukti, the pursuit of bhukti. But because we haven't understood that, we have reduced the whole interpretation to women becoming this lusty creature that has asked Indradev to give them the boon that they can continue fulfilling their sexual desires while pursuing such a path. And somebody else says that you're killing an unborn child and so on. Now, there are no contradictions in the Shastras. If this was correct, then why would we have the Vasishtha Dharma Sutra saying that just by virtue of menstruation, month after month, women become clean and pure? Even Chanakya Niti, you never expect to see such a line in Chanakya Niti. Chanakya Niti talks about Shuddhi, and it says that how different metals are cleaned. So it says brass is cleaned by ash, copper is cleaned by tamarind. Similarly, a woman is cleaned, or she goes through a cleansing because of Rajasvara, because of menstruation. So why would we have texts equating menstruation so obviously to cleansing, and then you interpret this thing as being something impure? Just does not make sense at all, right?
Yeah.
So when we read stories in the Puranas, every story we must understand deeply resonates with the idea of moksha. And if we haven't understood the science of moksha itself, then it's very likely that we will misinterpret these things. Now, what actually happened in the story? First of all, it's common sense. If someone does you a favor, you don't return it by giving them a curse. So, if women took away the guilt or the sin of Indradev, what he gave them was not a curse, it was a boon, a blessing. And that alone is enough to understand that the gift of menstruation is what they receive, not the curse of menstruation. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to understand. What he gave women in return for taking away his sin was the gift. The text does not call it a gift or a curse. These things came in the interpretations, by the way, because they assume that, oh, they menstruate, it must be a bad thing. That's how the men interpreted it. But those of us who don't see menstruation as a bad thing will start with questioning that itself. Why did you add that word curse? Or why did you add the word sin? Because the text doesn't mention it. Why did that appear in your interpretation? That will be my first thing. The second point is this: the physiology of pursuing moksha, that is slightly different for a male physical body and a female physical form. In both cases, however, the pursuit of moksha requires that the human seed contains a concentration of prana. It is our life energy. When I say human seed, in men I mean the semen, the sperm, and in women I mean the egg and the ovum. So this human seed should be transformed into a subtler form. Now, if you study Ayurveda, we have the concept of the seven dhatus, the seven tissue layers. When you consume food, it goes through each of these tissue layers: rasa dhatu, rakta dhatu, mamsa dhatu, majja dhatu. It goes like this. And finally, the finest essence of our food is in the seventh tissue layer, which is your reproductive layer called shukra dhatu. And this is where the semen and the ovum, the quality of the semen and the ovum is determined by the health of this shukra dhatu. This is in our physical form when you are pursuing a worldly life. When you pursue the path of moksha, it does not stop at the seventh layer. The shukra dhatu becomes even finer, and the human seed gets transformed into what we call the ojas and the tejas. The ojas is basically your robust immunity, and tejas is that aura, that light, which is the fine essence of the Agni Tattva that you will see in people who are enlightened. People who pursue brahmacharya, you will see that there is that aura of theirs that you cannot miss. That happens when the human seed, through spiritual sadhana, gets transformed into finer ojas and tejas. So for men, if you have to transform the seed, you must first conserve it. So conserving the seed for men means conserving or retention of the semen, and that is why celibacy is so important. Now, I also like to point out that brahmacharya is not equal to celibacy. Brahmacharya is celibacy with the sadhana, because only celibacy in the Western sense will lead to frustration. But celibacy with sadhana is what is brahmacharya, and that works to transform the semen that is retained. It transforms that into subtler forms. If the same thing you had to show in a female form, now think, where is the female seed released? It does not get released during sexual intercourse, so celibacy is not a requirement for the female form. The female seed is released during menstruation and during childbirth, because the seed has now gone into forming a human. So the removal of the female seed happens during menstruation. So the equivalent of semen retention, if you talk of it in the female body, will end up menstrual retention. So if you blindly follow the path that men are following of renunciation, then the consequence is that your menstruation will stop. Because in the process of retaining the female seed, it will end up stopping your period. This is the fundamental thing that has to be understood. Now coming back to Indradev's story, what is the boon that he gave women? You can pursue a life of bhakti and at the same time attain to mukti also. And that feature becomes possible in the female form by virtue of menstruation. Because of menstruation, we don't need to do celibacy, which means that we can have a normal, married, sexually active, healthy life. And when menstruation stops, that is at the time of menopause, very naturally the seed is retained in you. So all that practice of, that men have to do all that sadhana, it is not required for the female form if she simply follows the rules of going via bhukti and after menopause following mukti. And that's why there's so much sadhana for men. They have to do Sandhya Vandana 3 times a day and all of that. But for women, just make sure you menstruate right and everything else is taken care of. Right? So that's why menstruation is that gift that frees you from having to do all that intense sadhana, and at the same time opens up for you the possibility of bhukti and mukti when done in the right phases of your female life cycle. And that's how it has to be understood, Shivani ji.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful interpretation. It was actually I found it really profound when I read that aspect in the book, and the fact that we have that ability to pursue both those paths, right, at the right times in our lives. I feel
And quite effortlessly, actually,
quite
quite
effortlessly.
effortlessly.
Yeah, it's inspiring actually. Thank you for that explanation. I'm going to move into the last two questions, which are around sort of urban women, because I want to bring it back to the Western society here as well, and how we can take what we know from your teachings and from your interpretation of the Shastras and apply that here. Before I do that, I just wanted to touch on a lot of the campaigning that goes on right now across social media from various organizations is obviously very much focused on smashing shame around periods, period dignity, access to menstrual products, stopping seclusion practices, which is another area which we haven't been able to touch on today. Again, seclusion, I feel, has a very negative connotation in terms of the word. Language across cultures is such a vast topic in itself, and leads us to some of these misinterpretations. But I think a lot of what we kind of campaign against is very much things that we see as being wrong from a socioeconomic perspective, right? It's actually, and we mix that up with us being rejecting or vehemently against certain menstrual practices. So I just wanted to get your view on that, the campaigning that is happening now, how you feel about that and where you feel our mindset should be focused more on.
So, just about every NGO that's working on this subject, and I know NGOs because I come from that social space, whether it is in India or outside India, their funding comes from product manufacturers. It's as simple as that, and I know it because I have been approached by all the leading manufacturers in my early days, and I refused. Their agenda was very simple: help us enter the rural Indian market, and we will fund your work. So you see, any of the work out there, it's funded by manufacturers of sanitary products. I have never taken funding for my work on menstruation because I did not want it others telling me what I need to do in this. And simply to arrive at the truth, you have to explore it in a very unbiased fashion and without a pre-decided agenda. But it's okay. I will still say that it is okay if some manufacturer wants to market and sell their product. That's fine. That happens all the time with sales and marketing. But the problem is they are doing this by shaming women, by shaming traditional practitioners, and that's what is not okay. And they never shy away from using false data. So you have not just about India, they make loose claims. Even UNICEF says 1 in 10 girls in Africa drop out of school, as if Africa is one nation. And how they can make such loose claims is ridiculous. A fellow researcher, she was the president of the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research in Boston, and I had, interacted with her a few times. She wrote this book called The Managed Period. And in that, she actually contacted people in UNICEF and said, where did you get this data from? And much to her surprise, they did not know where it came from. It was just out there in media, and even entities like UNICEF pick it up. Similarly, about India, you have ridiculous data which says that 80% women in India are using sand and ash and rags and whatnot. In all my 10 years of work, I have never come across this. Not only that, this thing that makes this claim is not even a published study. It is not in existence. So my issue is that you want to sell your product, go ahead, but don't do it using false data, false statistics. You have made NGOs and activist puppets of your mission, which is purely an economic goal. You want to increase your sales. And NGOs and even entities like, foundations, they are just a front for the companies who are behind this and who are funding this. And all that is fine, but don't you dare shame women who are practicing and following tradition. You have no authority and no right to do that. And that's the message that I want the women to send across clearly to these people. Not only are they dumping substandard products, for example, when I spoke to some of the manufacturers, they told me how the same name and the same product, it's different in the European market and it's different in the Indian market. It's a substandard product for the Indian population. The same brand, the same product. Okay, so not only are you dumping substandard things here, you are also doing it by shaming the people here, and you have no right to do that. You have no right to do that.
So yeah, again, I mean, it's interesting. Like I've watched documentaries like Period End of Sentence over here, which was the massive Netflix documentary that told some really, bad untruths really about the situation over there. And then you have movies, blockbuster movies like Padman, etc., which sensationalize the need for sanitary products. And actually, when you come full circle and you see what a lot of Western proponents are actually campaigning for now, it's also sustainable period products, right? So we're going back
I wonder
to
where they learned that from.
yeah, the cloth, right? We're going back to the cloth. It's so
Yeah.
funny. A lot of these things, we talk about chakra system, we talk about utilization of cloth, etc. There are so many movements today in Western society which actually are built on the foundation of everything we know from our Vedic background, right, and our dharmic sort of practices. I was thinking, going back to seclusion practices, just very briefly, but even things like the red tent movement and women's circles, etc., which everyone in the West it's actually blown up right now, especially in lockdown. People have been accessing these kinds of practices more and more for their menstrual, for their mental health even. And the red tent movement is something that has grown out of America, for example, and it's all about women coming together to honor their cycles, their lunar cycles, having a restful space in which to do so. And this is all what we have been doing in according to Vedic practices and dharmic practices. It's stuff that we know, but it goes back to what you're talking about, cultural bashing. When we do it, it's seen as oppressive to women, but suddenly it's done from a Western perspective and it takes on a whole new meaning. But I'm sure you agree with a lot of
That's hypocrisy at the highest level. In one line, that's all I'd call it, it's hypocrisy.
Sure. Moving into our final question, really, and I think it's really hard as women who are not just urban women, but there are urban women in India as well. I know that you have similar issues in places like Mumbai, etc., where there's a very modern lifestyle, who are also rejecting some of these Vedic practices and Hindu practices around menstrual health. And this gets further compounded by the media around us, the narratives that continue to be perpetuated. How can we circumvent that, and how can we start to go back to the foundation of the knowledge that we have and apply some of these practices today practically? What do you feel we can do?
It's fair to say that everyone has an opinion, and everyone's worldview is different, and that's perfectly fine, and I have no issues with that. So if there are women in India or elsewhere who want to dismiss all of this practice, they're welcome to it. The problem is when you start imposing those ideas on others. And that's something I have seen so much in the social space, that just because someone can speak in English or they are funded and they dress differently, they come and impose their opinions on others and shame them into changing their practices. And that's where I feel that people need to draw the line. You don't want to do it, it's perfectly fine. I'm not going to go out of my way to convince women who don't want to follow these to do it. It's really your doing, your undoing. I will not interfere with your beliefs and your thoughts. But please do not impose your views on others. Let them be, especially women in the villages. They're happy doing what they are. Who made you their savior? And what gave you the authority to go out there and preach to people about whom you have never made the effort to learn? The whole social work and social space has become so corrupt because of people thinking that they know more than the others. And anything that they see as different from their own, they start by dismissing it, never by trying to understand it. The first step is dismiss it. Why? Because it's not what we do. So it's perfectly fine if those who feel that they are right do not want to do these practices. I have absolutely no issues with them. I will never try to convince them. But you do not have a right to interfere with those who want to do those practices willingly. That's all I would say on this, Shivani.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I guess more for me is like, what can I do? Obviously, I'm already here, I'm talking to you, I'm trying to learn, but to share this knowledge. And hopefully, as you know, a lot of the work that we're doing here as part of Hindu Women's Festival is to be able to break down some of these narratives and show an
Right.
alternative
Sure.
narrative.
Sure. So,
And
yes, yeah,
yeah,
I'm
go.
glad you reminded me of that. So those of you who are open to it, and that in itself is a big quality, because like Shivani ji, we none of us started off by knowing the answers. I have had a journey to get here. Shivani ji has had a journey to get here. And if you are someone who's open to making that journey, then the first thing I will tell you to do is start paying close attention to your period. See, women learn a lot more through the experiences of their body than through any book. And especially if these are books written by men, I would request that you don't start off with that. Even if you must read it, do it later. But first point is to observe your period. Whatever I told you about the doshas and how it could be different during your period based on what you've done, start paying attention to it. Start paying attention to simple things like how you are feeling emotionally during your period. Start paying attention to how you feel when you are around others. See, the whole idea of menstrual seclusion, we've reduced it to the superficial idea of rest. Yes, rest is important, but it's more than that. Simply being near another person in a way that your electric field will start interacting with that person's electric field will start to manifest as problems in your body. Bring your body to a level where you can start sensing these subtle changes. See, when I'm regular with yoga and pranayam and dhyan at the time when I'm not having my period, and when I do get my period that month, I become so sensitive to others' presence. Simply somebody else standing around me, especially if it is of the opposite gender, a male, I will start experiencing something like cramps. Just passing by a puja room, I will start feeling something not so right in my abdomen. One day before my period, when I sit in dhyan, I can actually feel pran from everywhere going into the lower regions of the body. So start becoming like that. Start becoming observant of the subtle changes in your body. That's the first step, because science is what? It is experience. It should never be just about reading theories in books or making interpretations that you have never experienced. Everything that I have written, the whole of Ṛtu Viḍyā, you can understand just by experiencing your body. So bring your body to that state where you can experience subtle phenomena, and then you will not need convincing. You will know it via your own body's experience. And that I feel is the right way, especially for women, to go about knowing this subject.
Such great advice. And you know, I've come to this journey much later on in my life, and I still hope I can make change, right? And it's great to have come full circle and come to this point where I can go through this positive inquiry and hopefully help other people understand as well what they can do better for their menstrual health and their goals in life, right? Overall. So it's been such a fantastic, insightful conversation with you, Sinuji. And for me personally, just to be able to, I won't forget this experience of being able to speak with you directly, actually. And I think it will help to really inform my piece for Beyond the Bindi that I will hope to go on and write. And definitely be crediting you in that piece as someone who's really helped my understanding. So thank you for coming to the platform today, to Hindu Women's Festival, and sharing your insight. I'm sure everyone will take away so much. Thank you so much for your time.
Shivani ji, really dhanyawad to you, because I'm so happy to see someone take in all that I have said and write it like it is her own. I don't care if you don't credit me. Just the fact that you have taken it in so well is credit enough. I'm just so happy that someone has understood it the way you have and kept that open mind to explore it. I wish you immense success in your endeavor to help other women make this journey like you have, and I hope that everything you touch turns to gold. All the best, Shivani ji, for
Thank
whatever
you.
you did.
Dhanyavad. Dhanyavad.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming.